Good morning, Geshe Yeshe Thabkhe.
Yeah, hold on to do the good morning.
Good morning, our interpreter Katrina Brooks.
Good morning.
And to everybody who's joining us in the morning, in the afternoon, at night, welcome to Kamalashila's status on meditation with Geshe Thabkhe. I have some announcements. So first of all, please use only the chat box for questions, and you can send them, and then we will go through them, and we may be able to send them to Geshe Yeshe Thabkhe, and we may not be able to answer all of them or give them all of them to Geshe Yeshe Thabkhe, but we give our best. And please don't use the chat box for anything else. And if you follow our recitations now, then please go on our event listing page on our website. You can download a PDF there. We will start with the recitations now.
Teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, one thus gone, foe destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one God to bliss, knower of the world, supreme God of beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans to the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate like offerings and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you faced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow. With pure bodies formed supremely fine, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme signs, face like a spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not, incomparable wise one, to you I bow. Great compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to 2, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. His ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn out Meru, for land, sun, and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offer to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamir I take until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha by the merit I create by listening to the Dharma. I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha by the merit I create by listening to the Dharma. I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha by the merit I create by listening to the Dharma. I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Dimara.
Dixon.
Oh yeah. Oh, that is it. Oh yeah, I'm not this go. Good. Oh, they are church by the other shelf somewhere. Oh, Tony. Rang you talk about Tongi is. Rang you talk about Tongi, can she send you to me? Young da Seba couldn't keep it in the choy, you know, say. Oh, Tony says from Batara. Tanga to Cassie Kibuchung with the Gina. Check it, Tambo, Yashungang, Kansachina. And the Tambo. Sentient Shelia. Sawachena Jigmare some. Sawachena. Tunge Yungure some date, Tunge Chong the Jigmare some Shangy Sochi Soba. Sawachena, Shala Tunge Yungure Timbe some. Shala Sawapa, Dunga use from Yukone Sawapa. Sini Yeni, Chimbatan Sobala Sobo Comne. Joachima had a me, Quabanch Topna Ansam. Nyawa Yeda Tundula Soba Kemekuba, Tendage some Luchitone, and then make you a chupa, Kiwachu Truba Church, Trubadoa. Takibu Drinky Kabsutele, Loya, Gachurchin. Loa. Oh, Takiwachima, Sadami, Quaban Tomna, Negab Remato, Sadamila Tunge Mabuyode. And then let on Yamo be showered to your chinge, young Kiwachima, Niasole, Kessibare. Tayende, let on Yamo be one. Sadamina Yida Tundu Kawina, give me good by Chegusam. Koala, Rala Ramamba, Kichi Chekoba. Tell it ten to Tarwachi, and I would some teacher go there some. And a koala tandu. Sadami, Tawatia, Nigab church to be ten some mato. Ko ten to Tawachi and do something, Tarba to be shadow. And time about Metabada, time about. And Chagdang Samlo. Simjalina Nazo, Conso said Chagdang Samlo. Or Tindrepan Sido. So I did keep on drinking this one. I'll let teachers on my document.
So here, as for what to begin with, to start with a verse from the great Pandit Atisha, he says that those who, through their personal suffering, truly want to end completely all the suffering of others are persons of supreme capacity. So we had seen before, prior in the verses prior to this, that for a being of a small scope or a smaller capacity, one who is first entering into practice, they are thinking that, well, I need to abandon harming other sentient beings because this is going to bring about suffering. Suffering for other sentient beings that I create through my harm is going to generate further suffering. And so due to that kind of contemplation, they avoid any kind of non-virtues, avoid killing and so forth, abandon the 10 non-virtues and engage in positive practices like generosity and ethics and so forth in order to secure a good rebirth as a human or a god, in order to not be born in the lower realms, as say a hell being or a hungry ghost, contemplating those kinds of suffering suffering, they abandon non-virtuous actions and engage in virtue for that kind of purpose. And then expanding the sort of goal, making it more expansive, one gets to the being of middling capacity, who recognizes that, well, even if one is born as a human or a god, one experiences all the sufferings of cyclic existence. From the moment of being born, one is subjected to the various types of sufferings. And this is because one is born due to the force of karma and the afflictions. And so recognizing that all of the kinds of existences one can take within this cycle are still in the nature of suffering, that none of them is really a free kind of existence. One wishes to be freed from that kind of cycle of taking rebirth due to karma and the afflictions. And so recognizing that a rebirth as a human or a god is not really the ultimate goal, but is merely a temporary kind of state in which one can practice. The real kind of a goal that one is striving for is liberation from all of this, liberation from the cycle of existence. So recognizing the kind of fault of attachment and aversion and so forth, recognizing the importance of realizing impermanence and selflessness and so forth.
기분 링기 값으로 되네 차다 심전리야 딱초다 생초스 초스 초티 겨레샤 삼리 지다 뭐고 강이나 차다데 대왕게 랭에 버서안에 코아코르도 삼네 니 차다데 매버서 우여라 차다데 매버서야 된달이야 신디 깨지 집에 미다바지 삼을 땅도 가리나 tanto tengende se samlo tanto ene pe tawa tuwede ke sembo shebo se chigi oton soso o te ndiko keji jigbe midagba chende yendo mineba midagba ta ene tangjing gwange chagda ma buchi gwara yeri buchi tengen yin samsa chenje o tele midagba samtang gwara o tene shene chagda ki zode karesna dadon jimba se yu rangune tuba jimba sira nga se rawa de chue baje ene shen se de rawa de chue baje o ti wa ge yi do wa ta yin na da yin na da mai ge cha she ma bu chule so so samle pa so sha ba member ja koran ran ne su ji tu de ge sa yu yin wen ne su ma kira ta yin da se ge nga chara nye da se pe yu koran ge ngone rawa ge rang shin ji su tu de bre sam ko yara tel tene chagdan yong go de chagdan me ba so ya le ya ene yi do wa ina da yi do me wa ina da ta ina da nam gyu nga ju sam de ge rawa tu ban jin ba tin na she yo ma re sam lo ko de ene tong ba su de she da ju gu chu sa me ba nam gyu nga ju sam de nga se rawa do shu ju yo ba sam lo dang ge ra cha se de yi do wa me wa se de she ba je rawa do o de tan de ge me do so so sem ge pa tak ba re chi re to sam sa ge sam lo ko na cha dang yong do yo ra te de ki bun ding ge kap so sem je che me ba la me ne ta wa da ta ge nga ju sem je re ya ta wa da chen de tong ge chen de ge sem ki bu chung ge kap so yo ra te kya ru che ro re ta sem je che me ba ya ta wa da chen de da tong ge da chen de sam lo ke ene ta me ba da mi tak ba so go ti kong gu yo ra tar ba to ye ta da ti chi som na
So then the being of middling capacity, again, they begin to sort of expand their mindset, seeing the defects of attachment and aversion, because it is due to these kinds of states of attachment and aversion that we then accumulate karma that propels us in this cycle of existence. And so while we sort of want there to be a stable, lasting kind of happiness, the things that we are grasping at are actually temporary, are momentary. They're in this kind of momentary impermanence, meaning that they don't last for even a moment. We grasp at things as though they had some kind of permanence. We think that our life will sort of remain forever, but in reality, they don't have that sort of permanence. So in this way, the being of middling capacity begins to investigate things like impermanence in order to get rid of that grasping at things as permanent, as well as investigating and examining the way that we hold things to exist exist from their own side. So when we are, say, seeing something that we find attractive, or even the kind of sense of I that we have this thought of I or me that is set up from its own side, that isn't dependent upon anything else. And it's so too with the things that we take as objects. Like when we see something we think is attractive, we think it's that way from its own side. Or when we see an enemy, we think they're really that from their own side without being dependent upon anything else. So we hold things in this way, like, oh, that's my friend because they're really truly exist like that, or that's my enemy because they are really truly existent in that way. And so in order to get rid of that, in order to get rid of this way that we hold there to be some sort of autonomous self, this gets into the kind of a description or our understanding of emptiness, in that when we look for such a really truly existent self that's set up from its own side, there's nothing that we can find to point us to that really exists in that way. And so this kind of investigation leads us to understand that it is on this basis that countless sentient beings, we all wish to have happiness and we all wish to avoid suffering, as was realized for the being of small scope. But when we get to the being of middling capacity, we see that these beings are suffering due to this kind of misperception. And it's that sort of grasping at things as having existence from their own side that needs to be overcome. And so this is the kind of realization of a being of middling capacity.
Oh yeah, the given the so koya tongele tarbadi so chigdoa. Ran koya tongele tarna some titsoche. Timado rana shin tongenya de yor some shen rang pama nyandela so what tezo randa chigbo tongenya yor te tarbachego samza samluti keto madwa. Oh, teacher, that give chamber also. Oh, tell rangu talk about tongeki. Kibu chamber take talking kibu chungutan dringi samlutan to kanga yenden de yarding to yorwa yajeshin yorwa. Oh, tea kasoda. Ratonge na ne call a tarwa cheko do some. Oh, then I say ranchebu call a tarwa samlutan and jigamedo some. Rangi sendi pama nye dula sokba. Oh, tezu changma. Tunge kona kotjawa koal tunge nyana nyanchu ranchi budi koal tarkutu samna marab resam tirungi mare samroa rang pama tinje tezu changma randan rawa koya tunge kyawa thoma meba ne chenge sosumla kene rawa meba tunge nya tanda mao bana do se tunge nyanchi teya telia samlu matambo sosu chikbu tarna samsa samlutana te marab resamne Rwa, and some time just send the rang pama nye to the sogwa, so chene, tongue that tezo, tongue that chawache do some raw. Said this a mare, some shanda, Joal Tomayo Marton Nambe Luciana, Joangama Sosa Samlutana, but Trang Meshavare. Joangama Mindrichi na Pamata nye to the Sobakari, the Yayor, Tinga Machidu, Simjan de Pamata Rala Trincham Buchan de Majesty, Yomara, Simja Tamjania to Majuba Chindi, Pamania to Cadro Condition United Nation, Majuba Simja Yomare Sam. Roa. O T do Simja Tamje, Tunga Trawa Chaco de Samsang, Samlu Kogodoa, and the Ranchibu Samlutana Jigmare Sam. Takbe shenche baase so tanja samlutaya de to thoma me bana ranchi bura ke sheshe ane ran kange se de ke sheshe ran tawa to ke sheshe ne tanda bado ane ke tonge tamje de tawa tamje damba ke choyo ma to o tin nore de sam so ke sheshe ne shen Tunju Chedoni, Rangi Tandal, Rangi Kange say that Tawatoya Tandal, Shala Sawachebala Sobayungo, or Titi Medusa, Norsha, some Tasam Lutanda Kora, Pe Chebuja Yorno, Takshen Chewa Ase, at that Toma Mebane, Rancheban Zimbanashi, Simja Shebansi, Toma Mebane, Ran Simja Shayar Dona, Ran Shengi Tando Kuamato, Randu So Meche, Shendit Soche, Tagbe Shenji Bechu Simtigu. Simja Tamje Tunga de Trawacha Samsa. Ta Simja Tamje Tunga de Trawacha de Chaya Niba Korva, Tanda Ran and Niba Yomare. 단도 심지 탐지 파션을 ran 동에 탐지를 trewe niwayo mare. Tiyedeja tange lo chane 심지 탐지 동에다 제 토바시에 규진의 상고로 저 ran 당보 꽤끔세 연대 군대 rwa chamba nyingji tsawala sokba tab sangbu tarshin langdurji ne tabje sheba tarshin rangi pangdo tarshin ba kyo ganga se yenden tamje langdurji ne tamje kengen tamje kenba dendreji gyuro chigin insam ba nyen tagba ne teya nga zune shi samlu chende jangjamado dene men rungide samlu tang yuwa mara che dege chone kyo deya rwa sokbu che ruwa armado semde deya rwa samlu kyun degira 어떻게 배겨네 겨와 가져 배고나 배네 심지 탐지게 더 통계게 가사시 지금 인섬 꽤나 레레네 배세 탑시시 연대 레레네 토베 탑시시는 게 심지 탐지게 더도 겨네 겨만 본 배네 산제je 고바 토베 저기 인섬 꽤고세 연대 군대 이제 기부시 저기 인섬 대전하는 심지 탐지게 더도 주발은 누가 토바메 봐 연구하도 된대 삼로 거야 들려 기부 첨부시거라 강시 랑 동네 그러와 되니까서 어디 세버군에 기부되니 초연어서도 라디오 떡배 동네기 강시 생기 동네 그 양다 세버군에 현다 동네에 세버도봐 자원도봐 강시 라디오 떡배 동네 소소를 뺄라네 소소 양반나시 현다 그냥 그 어려 삼들와 rangi dokbe tunga ki kanshi shangi tunga ku yanda seba kunende kibu teni choyi no so kibu chimbe samlo tuliya tende chukudwa teji kun lama musima.
So here, then, being of middling capacity is mainly contemplating their own suffering, wishing to be freed from this cycle of existence based upon their own suffering. But here, they're not really thinking about all of those other sentient beings, those beings that have existed as their mothers and fathers, friends and relatives and so forth. And so here, as we see in the kind of state of mind of a being of great capacity, is that those who, through their own personal suffering, truly want to end completely all the suffering of others are persons of supreme capacity. So a supreme being has sort of like taken the base of these thoughts of the being of small and middling capacity and improved those understandings in order to get to a point where they see, it's really not okay to just think of my own suffering alone, but all sentient beings have acted as parents, as friends, as those that are close to me, loved ones of mine. And so it's not suitable for me to think just of my own suffering and want my own freedom, but rather these other sentient beings are experiencing all of these same kinds of suffering. And so I need to free them as well. To only think about my own suffering while they are suffering as well is a very base kind of a thought. It's a very sort of unsuitable sort of a thought. So here, this kind of attitude of a being of great capacity recognizes that there have been countless lives. We have gone through countless lives, and we can't therefore point to any being whom we have not been close to, who we have not had a kind of relationship of being a loved one to us. And so in this way, we recognize that all of these sentient beings are just like me. Based upon our own experience of suffering, we extrapolate that experience to others and wish to free them as well. Now, we have, through countless rebirths, thought only of ourself, really held ourself as most important, thinking, well, I need to accomplish my aims, and sort of looked down upon others. And in that way, we've harmed others to get what we want and done things that have accumulated negativities, trying to get our own aims. But really, what we need to do is recognize that we need to exchange that self and other in terms of exchanging our kind of self-cherishing attitude and instead cherish others. And whereas we normally kind of cast aside the needs of others, recognize that working for the needs of others is actually what we want to accomplish. And so now when we make this kind of recognition that others suffer just as we do, and there's a desire, a wish to free them all from their suffering, we get to a point where we realize that, well, at the current time, I don't have the ability to actually benefit benefit these other sentient beings. But by training all my mind, by actually over time developing qualities through lifetime after lifetime, I can reach a state in which I have removed all faults and developed all qualities of love and compassion and knowledge and so forth, knowing to the perfection what is to be adopted and what is to be abandoned, and reach that state of omniscience in which I am really truly able to benefit other sentient beings. So in this way, we should make a kind of resolution that lifetime after lifetime, we're going to make effort toward this goal of attaining Buddhahood. And then once one has attained that kind of state in which all faults have been removed and all good qualities fully developed, then one will have the ability to benefit and help other sentient beings. So again, as Atisha's Lamp for the Path states, that those who through their own personal suffering, so based upon our own experience of suffering, then truly want to end completely all sufferings of others, are persons of supreme capacity. So those who sort of take on this mission to free and liberate others based upon their knowledge of their own suffering, this is the attitude of a being of supreme capacity.
We don't have any sound from Geshe Yeshe Thabkhe.
거기 민두겐라
가르쳐요. 다 기부 총을 값소 라게 첨부 라게 남미게 첨부 라게 롱버게 첨부 어디 저기 하죠. 어디 지내디 버와 이나 랑다 랑쇼 소소다 소소 김드라 소소 가르쳐래 개가 롱버 가리 이나야 어디 계셔 뒤강에서야다 대화 주에도 계셔버려 계셔붙이기 와라 지내주기 와라 아 이나야 소소다 소소 남미다 소소 지소 뒤강에서야다 대화 주에 전달이야 샹라 처와치는 그 말에서 샹라 처와치면서 샹라나 시타완도라 통에 medebe samlo koyorno 샹라 너가 제가 samlo 어디 samlo 되체네 아니 저쪽부터가 최당부터래도 다 기분 된게 값소 전에 랑초스 소소 롱바 소소 메데 소소 남미 대장장 samlo 따야돼 samlo 순종래 삼 자순종래 삼 좋아 대도자 닥쳐서 랑게 남미 랑게 초 랑게 롱바 랑게 제거 랑게 미리세 초지제 현다지 초지 텔레니링 samlo 따야돼 야고 말했음 작단 매바 샘제 닥쳐다 현조 그 샘제리아 개발 마시베 제제 찍었다기도 작단 매바 속도 기본 전기 값 뒤속으로서도 이나 기본 전기 값도 라진진데 소치요라 소소체 번전데 라자 좀 버터 티치 아마도 라레 계셔 지토요 마라 다 기부 첨배 값소 네 딱쇼데 현조 작단 매바 삼진데요 마레스로 제다 심제 창마 탐제 딱쇼 현조 매바체네 라레 현체 번전고레세 통만 매번에 라게 치슈체니 경야 용기요라 다단다 현게 치슈체고레 삼로코랑 요아땅고레 다다 현게 삼로 쳐버자고레 다신 쳐와서도 뒤인데서 네 딱배 현체 버체네 라레 현라고 쳐고레세 뒤께 부천부 삼로 코고도와 달레 현체 버체 메고네 니 현게 던달이야데 경크세 연대 근데 기부를 개방만 볼래 선남대 시계 초를 초산이 배부세트 용거도 어디 인데서 기부 첨비 삼로 심지어 탐지게 된도 아니 사제 요거바 랑경크세 연대 근데 기부 심지어 탐지게 된 줍통게 내가 연게 좀 되바나시 줍에 규진 상게 상화전에 라를 신용 요바적으로 상부 탈신바 랑도 탈신바 사제je 고바데 토벌차게 삼 티키부 첨부래도 나라죠 다 대답이 사제je 고바시 진에게 토벌차게 삼 닝 탁번에 타적으로 아주 다 토벌차고 센터샤주 엄마라 되니까 네버신부터 말아 네바도 토벌차게 삼고라 교환대 장장 말아 교환에 교화처럼네 저리 장바체 대주 밀로톤 방제 자에 삼루당게 와라 어때 동네 타도 네바도 심제 탐제게 더 좁통게 상부당 탑등 시럽 네가 탈침바 로 야 상부당 시에 네가 탈침바 심지어 탐지게 좁통게 밑견맹게 랑도 삼제 생gen지 지금 연삼 대던달이 아니 대좁지게 쳐대 단단단단가지고 배전을 소반하시 터바체 삼바체 이 안에도 콤바치기 인삼 대던달이 쳐는 게 인삼 공로세 탐네 삼바쇼스 어tin들
So, in the kind of mind of a being of small capacity, they hold their self as important. Their self, their family, their community, their country, they're sort of based upon that idea of self and other. They're really, they hold as more important, eliminating the sufferings of those that are considered on their side or or a part of their family or their country and so forth. But in service of accomplishing their own aims, they recognize that they can't hurt others because others are just like me in that they don't want to suffer and they want to have happiness. And so they go about practicing or accomplishing the aims of the ones that they consider to be on their side in a way that doesn't harm others. This is the sort of motivation of a being of lowest capacity. And a being of middling capacity, they think, well, it's not okay to think just about my country or my family, my area and so forth, that's sort of a partial and a biased kind of attitude. We actually need to get rid of this thought of my side and the other side and see all others without any kind of attachment or aversion. Now, the being of middling capacity is not yet able to value others more than they value themselves, but they have gotten rid of this attitude of my side and other side. And so in that way, they have eliminated that kind of partiality, attachment toward some and aversion toward others. But at the level of a being of supreme capacity, just getting rid of that sense of my side and other side is not sufficient for them, but rather it's crucial to see others as more important, to actually exchange our self-cherishing attitude for an attitude that cherishes others and work for the sake of others, to make this kind of commitment that one is going to put in effort to accumulate merit over countless eons in order to attain the state of Buddhahood, where one has eliminated all faults, gained all good qualities, and has the ability to actually benefit other beings by having perfected the sort of objects of knowledge, what is to be adopted, what is to be abandoned, and so forth. And so this kind of motivation, thinking that by whatever means I'm going to accomplish this state of Buddhahood, and not just in one lifetime, but through life after life. And we have to really have this kind of sincere and definitive sort of attitude. It's not like a wishy-washy, oh yeah, I sort of want to do this, but really think about this and set this kind of intention that is long-lasting and long-term, thinking that I'm going to continue to practice lifetime after lifetime, taking this dharma, which is to be accomplished in order to attain the state of Buddhahood that has eliminated all faults and perfected all good qualities. And so here, the dharma that we are looking at is this text of Kamalashila, the stages of meditation. And so we should undertake these teachings with a sort of motivation that I'm going to hear these teachings, I'm going to reflect on them and meditate on them in order to attain that state of Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings.
당아주 데레트와 그래서 현장데 그래서 시야차르딩아주 닝지 첨부시에서 심지어 탐지에 돈도 산계적 고바 중간이나 짜와데 가려서 다 닝지 첨부케 시슈레서 심지어 탐지리아 니리메바 당분간주 소소 파마니엔데 나밀레 짜와시여라 소솔 짜와여라 대장제 멤버즈 나밀레 짜와 대장제 멤버즈 자처르다네 심지어 탐지리아 잠바다 짜와 공국레 송거라 디나네 당부 심지어 탐지 동에데 잔데지 짜와데 개체슈레서 대소소 락발레 여베 제시 여베이네 네 산제게 연데 타르견 근세 연데 근데 기부테 소소 락발레 여바다 직바데 송거도 저자 닝지 첨부도 여나 닝지 첨부 여나 신 심지어 탐지 동에다 자와데 별로 좀 많이 봐시 여나 로숙 첨부 여나 동에다 탑 가르쳐도 삼 탑대 산제게 고반 톱고래 삼 아니 산제 거바 톰되고 연구하노 동에다 전도 요로디 여베이나 아니 동에다 자와르시베 니바 전지 차고로 소술 네바요로 소술 네바요나 라견 것에 연대 군대 랑도진에 탐제 생gen지 자고 그래서 산제지 거반 톰도 치고요도 어디인데 닝지 전부도 연하네 산제 개바 장면 망보 초사 봐도 손남지 초사 다른 건 봐도 산제 강가 연구하러 와 어디인데 장고 닝지 전부도 연하 닝지 전부도 랑도 저기 자와대서 도서 랑도 저기 자와서 가르쳐서 심지어 탐제 동에도 전도 줄로 지연나 대 동에도 저에 탑시 적으로 다 동에도 제 통근데 가른 도서나 소소교 근세 연대 군대 적으로 당부 소소 심지어는 일이 매게 상부에 찍고 당게 애니 심지어 대조는 쭉 통근게 랑도르게 내 생게 적으로 텔라 빵바 타도도 떡바 타도서도 빵도 타도니더라 소소교 탐제 파빵세 아니 연대 랑도르게 내 탐제 신선에 아니 생기 때 동에도 저와 지토그와 때문에 동에도 저와서 말람 잡아 삼종을 마도 제토에 누가 연구 마도 어때인데 니지 첨부데 랑도 저기 자와래 랑도 빵도 탈심보다 탐제 kimba 그 삼로 코야 되네 고겨라 샤동에다 저와 자고 그래서 제는 탑시 가르치긴 봤으나 다른 제토와 챙겨게 견크세 연대 군대기 기부친 주로 제고 삼로 코여라 저래 랑도 저기 자와 테레스 셴도 저기 자와 테레스 닝지 첨부요나 택반 멤버 자좀 받나시 제저랑 타르바토소나 랑 시베 잉라 쇼네 심지어 때 자좀 맞아봐 시베 잉라 쇼단 게 되게 지금 말했잖아 닝지 첨부요도 라동에 되나야 샤 동에다 저 탑시 지금 마도 랑코에 동에래 타로 점비 양된 것도 지금 말해 미네베 양된 것도 지금 코에 동에래 저와 좀 많이 봐 시제 집어 빵바 집어니가 녀몽베 집어다 미시베 몽바세베 집어 빵바니가 것도 지금 특만 멤버에는 라 코에 동에래 타르바 점기 시와 것도 지금 왔다 어제 시외 영래 쇼고 말해서 생기 tentu 그래 시외 영래 마셔보세 다음날 뒤송도 시외 영래 쇼고데 택바만 만나시라 타르바톰네 당에 소리지 톰네 저와 통마메바네 레도 녀모봉게 코아코고 다데메게 사선 베심 타르베 대와서 다텐도 대와르지라 다데서 삼 시외 영래 쇼데 말해서 그래서 자주 삼바라티 심정이 더 그래서 시외인라 되는 냐바슈네 심정이 더 맞아봐 쇼바데 강반 멤버게 마부시 나리아 수연 로디고 말도 어디나 시세기 와래 저라 장주 삼바게 심정이 더 맞아서 라지부터 해야 돼 강반 멤버 나로야 미수연 쇼되고 말았더니 장주 삼바들 쇼되고 말했어 어디 인도로바 람비네가 소 센데 두베치 자와 닝지레 타르산제 조건반 톱소나 란산 게차네 생기된 손에 샬라 최선에 심정에 손에 최선에 되죠 니지 전부 요자 연구하다 니지 전부들 토마게 저 바도게 저 타마르게 저 제부민 바단 라송고도 산제 고반 톱사선 다 제부민 바나시레 다들 산제 냠뇨 제바 삼만 가줄 마소는 가줄 롱제 요라 어디 그래서 친사리다 다 좋던데 지리 닝지 전부도 개치슈데 에스탄부 텔레베나 아니 산제 근데 샨다 상무 소소라고 치바데 치바데스 대랑된 쪽에 자와레 샨데 쪽에 자와레스 친사리 당한주 데네마 저 거래서 땅님 검사들래서 어디지 손을 또서마 도치마 단데
So here, as for where we had arrived in the text, we had come to the point of developing equanimity. So last we had gone through the importance of compassion. And so here, having this kind of compassion that is not a sort of biased compassion, like our ordinary kind of beings, we have compassion, the wish to free from suffering, those that are close to us or those that we consider to be friends and family. But we need to gain a kind of compassion that is impartial, that is without any sort of sense of attachment to to some aversion for others. And so here, this is under the heading of the compassion section, but we'll be picking up from developing equanimity. So here, it's described that if you have this first root of compassion, it's as if you have Buddhahood in the palm of your hand. If you really have this unfabricated attitude of compassion, of wishing to free others from their suffering in a sincere and heartfelt kind of way, this is the root that leads to the fruit of Buddhahood. So if one develops this kind of attitude, this sincere desire to free others from their suffering, then naturally one will want to pursue gaining a state where you're able to free others from their suffering. And this is where the desire to attain Buddhahood comes in. So Buddhas, based upon their accumulation of merit for eons, have developed the ability to benefit others completely. And so here, to attain that kind of state of Buddhahood is to have developed all of one's own good qualities. So here we need to understand that compassion is both the root of one's own aims, developing one's own aims, as well as the aims of others. So here, when we want to be able, the sort of state that one attains, the state of Buddhahood, is a state in which one has removed all faults and gained all good qualities, has brought one's realizations to completion, and has eliminated and has also perfected or completed the elimination. And so when we have this sort of state, we have accomplished all of our own aims. And so this is the way in which we are able to develop those, is because we have this desire to attain a state where we're able to benefit others, where we know all of the points of what is to be adopted and abandoned, and we want to become a being with the ability to benefit others. Thus, this compassion acts as the root of gaining our own aims, comprised of the realizations and eliminations that characterize one's own enlightenment. And it's also the root of benefit to others. Our benefit to others starts through this root of compassion. If one is only concerned with one's own suffering, then one could follow the path of a Hir or Shravaka or a Pratyeka Buddha and attain that kind of arhatship, wherein one will remain within a state of peace and not have any desire to make effort at benefiting other sentient beings. But a fully enlightened Buddha is able to fully benefit others because they're not remaining within that state of a kind of peace. They haven't attained that sort of nirvana in which they're just going to be experiencing the bliss of nirvana without benefiting others, but rather they attain what we call a non or abiding nirvana, which is the removal of both of the obscurations to omniscience and the afflictive obscurations. And when they have eliminated all of those kinds of obstructions, they are able to then be of benefit to others. And so bodhisattvas, those who are in training, actually view the kind of peace of nirvana as being like a burning house. That's something that they don't want to go into. This is something that a Buddha would avoid at all costs. Rather, they want to remain in order to benefit other sentient beings. So compassion then is the root. It's important at the beginning for our giving rise to this desire to attain Buddhahood. It's important in the middle while we are training. And it's also described as like the ripening result of Buddhahood. The Buddha's actions that pervade everywhere are the result of this seed, this root of compassion. And so this compassion is important at the beginning, the middle, and the end. And if we make a great effort at compassion, then it's like we have Buddhahood in the palm of our hand. We have the very seed that will lead to that great result. So here, then we'll pick up from the way to meditate on compassion will be taught from the outset.
Well, yeah. Ninji Chimbo Combatelia, Tanzan Shindaji Shegdwa, Tanzan Shigonea Comboco de or Tina Tambu de Caresene, Tambu de Tanyam Shituba Segdwa, Tambu da Simja Kangala, Semyamba to Gresiguada, Caresene Tambunganzu, Tawada Trended and Tumeda Trended the Sausage Buludua, Rad Yabuchuna, some Tumachuna, some Rala Chamjitik, Geshe Tambuna Yoda. Rang Chamji Yore, Rang Namil Chamji Yore, and a Rang Lumboli Chamji Yore, Karine Chamji Yorno, Chamji Yosa, 동해대 제나 산테와 톰나 삼주는 배수 지그라 사야 통해 거래 거야 거래 내가 재판도 손도 깔래 잡고도 팀매는 영야 요마서 다시 되는데 당부 소소리 잠재 여바티 매나 소소 잠재 매나 고조 작 말이네 강에 여바티 삼루마다나 강에 대세야 삼루 고 말와 대화 대응아 톱고도 삼배 삼루도 매나 대화 통해 탑시 지금 말와 되는데 라라 잠재 여바티 라 첸디 만달레 첸디 동에도 첸디 대화 토에 탑시 지기도 와 디나시 되니 지소이나다 낭미나다 강가 자체로 체브스탄 대주 강가 리스 초리 전기 잠지라 초리 전기 잠지대 여고라 디시디레 야게 나게 시데 낭베 쳬리야 시레 소소 샘레야 여여베 연대시 야야게 당기 여르노 디야르 당구라도 모티인데 잠바데 서와세도 소소리 시지도 디야게 당기 여라 당분간주 초리 전기라는 잠지 랑게 낭미 랑게 롱바 랑게 시시에세 잠지 여라 텔레테네 첸디 강에서야 대화 쪽에 탑시셔제 만주 전부리 강가 니마든만다 야게 신탄다 내가 제대로 뒤던다 지여라 그때 첸디 좀 좋아 대하더니 초리 제로와 다 진짜 말했어 다들 semnyom고도 송거라 강가려 당님 인지 전부 깨워야 니리 매배 싸와디 탐절을 깨워라 semnyom고로 단단가라서 소소 가사요래 니사요래 텔 야가시를 도가들이야 동해다 제나 상금하러 콜도부 존나 삼기라 텐데 삼야미도스티 semnyamba 당님도 시디 쪽으로서 단데 사실 빼자는 소리도 신 돈도 담게르지네 담보 사데 라버르베 요네 돈도 야고 기마도 추데트지야 사코 코 냠보치 아부 소고레스 당님 제로와 어디 당부디 시도 시나네 당부 당님 세데 공구레스 거래 대간데르스나 텔라 닝지 콤베 림바 당부 시도 조반에 참데타 당부 닝지 첨부 영야게 림바 당부 데 컨트레스 카르리 조구레스나 오늘 저번 저어서 대시하기 송교로 단데마 당용기 시디 주고요래 토마르시 당용 공배 심제 탐제라 제소 착바다 컨트롤 살데 뇽베 심니 주버 저어서 당부데 가서 단다 가려서나 네 당용 그 심제 탐제야 제소 착바다 심제 가실이야 제소 차네 신자 요르노 도마조나 삼야부조나 삼제코 제수 착배 왕기 대화체도 동에 전도 요래 가셀이야 몇 콘도세네 디마조나 삼제 친절로 삼로 요르바 어떤데 다 삼로데 매버서 그랬어라 되니 제수 착바다 컨트롤 세데 가셀이야 컨트롤 제대 요르노 디바세 그랬어요다 단데 자첨보 제제 저 망보 삼로 다네 다다 삼로 되게 천데 gan자 삼로 다네 갈리 가부요다 첸디 파마다니 니도도리아 잠제 용야데 카르에스네 소소 탄달이 아부체사티라 티케와 ngamalai keran dende chenge minde chikene yore dasigora titanda kore gyagmarwa shanda chongura titanda kawayo rang chidwa kinde chide mileka tende ke yomarwa tingamala kawakena tendunde chikena kawakena sosolia chambada tsawa chenge chendi pamana shingende nashi sasan nashi yapu putu nashi kande shine tsawa kande yoba tende nashi kyawa ngamala kera tende chenge yore ase tingamala yore tatanda ko chedura kishpene ngama sheramado shangone chene kyawa ngama pamada nyenye de kare ne titanda ngazu yena ngazu ke chorge mato 근데 오늘 래 같은 전부 제로와 교황아마 망부 요래 교심마 망부 요라 챈딜에 가시 같은 전부 제로는 아주 제로도 와 그디 제나 마제베 된다 마로코 제르는 아주 제스 tendio 마로와 어디 인도한테 봐 스테고레스 거도 가서 토가 가실 콘도 제데 마제베 제제 10년반이 두고 그래서 10년반이 두고 자오 송도 땅님 두고 그래서 다다님 간데서 쪽그래서나 단디 마실도 심지어 탐제 대화내도 땅님 쪽그베 주세 가래서나 상말이야 찍바제는 천대 파마년이를 사자 부부들라 소바 컨트롤 저여바 나시 탐제를 sem념고베 교세 가르스네 nhóm고야면도 어디 가르진 고거르스네 봐 심제 탐제 대원 되버 찍바로 봐자래 소소이나다 랑게 파마년지 천대 랑게 잠제 요새도 이나다 상마 미션다 상마 대원도 동에 면도 버지 나 야가 주나서 두마 주나 삼게 자르마도 tubu chuna kaashin ki tende ke yo mardo tamche tawan dola tunge mendo bade nyamba rawa sura tamche tawan dola tunge mendo la sa ye soso nye to de jawa thongma me bana ral jawa thongma me ro ta ta ngam sendi chebu samta yo marwa che samlu tan du sa jawa thongma me bane ja ra jawa la je mile che la la che tondol che ka wa ka sa kali che yo no 제 상만에 천대 파마다 년이도 다 가봐 니부 대장자 거르게 되고 말어 산다데 산다 연구로 단단 아주 오신 말도 어때인데 심지어 탐제 파다마다 년이도라서 봐 마주로인데 유리어 말에서 면도 아시고 요 말에서 티인데 거 경험만 가진 신부제나 가진 신부제라 다들 소소 제서로 마도 티인데 수고도 동해 면도 반에 냠세 토마메 반에 토마 메바chen yekoana semje 강세 semje kande지나 내 자자망불 소소년도 주네 파다 마다 녀다 녀든 자실로 소바 근데 탄나 로벨로 소바라 랍제 장게로 소바 근데 마주로 치요 마데셔도 녀도 주바 테 가야 메도 냠도 용서 삼신소 어떻게 되려다 가진 개발식이 어려서고라 땅아주 나바체 경영시 켈랭게지나 지단 미시가를 저래 단데 카드들 가부생게들 거 가지 되그라 네말로니 수숨중 중에리아 약부체네 티토제 세베선도 지기도 하고 미마럽 사부이 베타인지라 생원에 전행에 마 약부체데 단다 약부체데 니마 약부체데 디딩알 약부체 깔레 카갈 약부체에서 망아야 진장고도 티 시간의 지와를 거티시 손자 티 경험마 약부체데 약부체장 도르 단단한지 전에 지요나 경험마랑게 파마다 년이들라 속바 티 전에 저 시부지 예제 천들을 사고면에 도게 용마도 진전의 단다도 바지 현다지 제대요나 뭐라 신나데 저 시부지 연구도 전다고 저와 된데 연구에 시지를 때 하마고 몽사 제손장 제게 요마도 티인도 티 규센들이다. 심지어 코로나 중간에 천대 파만년들 소보다 현다도 참마데 대화들 동에 면도가 가라 찍반도 와서라. 소디도 맹게 도다 사그소리 텐데요 마라. 에네 소소 팬도 버전에 삼루타게네 콘저게 소소 팬토요레스. 겨와 가데 가젤랑 요레 테줄레 자자 망보 소소 천대 파만년들 소보 케나 제버지서 컨디지네 티네시 마주고 심지어 엄마로 와서라. ene ta nirin chegoya kar do se go ra nirin chamero re sung go to da thoma me ba je semje kanda ta ge nyen do ma jurba kanya me do nyam do yong su samse tela cheta chi shin ta kheba kar che an do se go ra lala ne che so cha kira kheba kar chen che go se khashele cha ni be ya bu yin se je shen ja che je zawa che khashele khong du che de me ga che khashele tang nyum che ta su she te kar chen che go re se go ra lola ne control juba te davena 다게 심제 탐질라 som바니 뇽바니 주바다 심 뇽고 예세 뇽바 주게 예세 거래 당뇽 니니 메베 당뇽 데라 단단 가시 녀와서 사바제 자와제 가시 녀와서 소텐데 저 때메바테 소그레선 거라 데라 제다지 control ju에 데다나 다게 심제 탐질라 심니 뇽바니도 주버 차오 데다 예라 자신 परमेश्वर ने समदेश चंदे ने न्यम बटुके समदे ने तंबु से न्यम सा देता कुरम से गवारा तंबु से न्यम सा दे तारा जिने नाम सा समदानी न्यम तो मार दो तंबु चिता में राला काबो में कोंडु मंडी बा में गेंगे चिता मिल समल तो चेरा ता कोंजो ने खासे मी क्यूचे यो मारा दिल यावरे जे सुचा दे यावो में दो सम कोंडु चेगे यो मारा को येरे चेगे में दो 당님 공수 건설 semnyam 대냠 소나스고 대체라서 다 semnyam제기 구름 지셔가 알아 삼르단다래 No, yeah. Better to some conda. What if you should dig it? Yeah, Tibado.
Okay, sorry, that was a little bit of a long stretch.
But
So here, then when it comes to teaching compassion, it's going to be taught in various stages. We're going to go through these various stages of teaching compassion. And first, we'll begin with this developing of equanimity. So first, we need to recognize that we all naturally have this thought of love and compassion for those that are sort of we feel close to, those that we consider to be our friends and family and so forth. We have the thought that may I have happiness and may I be free from suffering, as well as when it comes to those that are around us that we consider to be close to us. And really, this is based upon their having shown us some sort of kindness. It is based upon recalling the kindness of others that we have a thought of, oh, this person is close to me. May they have happiness. May they be free from suffering. And so really, we need to recognize that we all have this kind of foundation of love and compassion. And this is the kind of foundation that we need to make an effort to increase and develop such that it becomes something sort of impartial for all. So usually we have this is actually quite a motivating factor. All of our sort of efforts within this life are to accomplish our happiness and to avoid suffering or avoid suffering for those that we love and so forth. And so it's really whether it's within an individual or a family, a society, this is a foundation that leads us to work for the benefit of others when we have an attitude of love and compassion, even this sort of partial kind of love and compassion that's sort of biased towards some and not extended toward all. But it is this foundation upon which we can build and develop this attitude of love and compassion for all sentient beings. So in order to remove our obstacles and accomplish our happiness, those are the kind of motivating forces. Now, when we get to this idea of great compassion, we need to eliminate that kind of sense of being close to some and distant from others. And rather, in order to develop this attitude of compassion for all sentient beings, we have to remove the kind of obstacle of partiality. So the example is often given of when we want to plant a field, if we want to get a good harvest from that field, we first have to level it out so we can plant it well. And so, so too, when it comes to our compassion, if we want to develop great compassion, we first need to develop this kind of equanimity toward all sentient beings. So here it says, begin the practice by meditating on equanimity. Try to actualize impartiality toward all sentient beings by eliminating attachment and hatred. So this begins by recognizing that all sentient beings desire happiness and do not desire to suffer. So we recognize that all sentient beings are exactly the same in this attitude of wanting to have happiness and not wanting to suffer. But we don't usually think of them sort of in this way, because again, as our love and compassion is normally biased, we are basing it on someone having shown us a kind of kindness in the past. But we need to expand beyond just thinking about this one life and the way that beings have helped or harmed us in this life, but think beyond that to see that there's countless rebirths. If we're a Buddhist, we think that there are countless lives, previous lives, and therefore it's a matter of all sentient beings have been born in states where they have benefited us, whether it was in a prior life or one prior to that or prior to that, whether we were born as humans or gods or animals. We have had connections with all of these beings, and it's really a matter of not recognizing, not remembering the kindness that they have shown us. And so usually when we get angry at some or we recall the kindness of others, we have this kind of love and compassion that is partial, but we need to eliminate that, get rid of our sort of anger towards some and desire or attachment toward others by recognizing that we have had other beings show us kindness in previous lives. It's just a matter of not recognizing it. When we forget the kindness that someone has shown us, we may not have that same attitude of love and compassion. And so by expanding our attitude and recognizing that we have had these relationships with all other sentient beings, there's none that we can point to and say they haven't acted as my friend or my parent. We, in this way, are able to eliminate that kind of partiality and recognize the kindness that all beings have shown us. So it continues by saying, think deeply about how in this beginningless cycle of existence, there is not one sentient being who has not been my friend and relative hundreds of times. And so therefore, since there is no ground for being attached to some and hating others, I shall develop a mind of equanimity toward all sentient beings. And so here, this is, again, the kind of reasoning that establishes why we should have equanimity is recognizing first that we are all equal and having this desire for happiness and desire not to suffer, but also that all beings are equal and having shown us kindness. And thereby we can't just think about this one kind of life, but we need to recognize all of those previous lives in which other sentient beings have shown us great kindness. But it's just a matter of we've forgotten that. We don't recognize it. And so they have acted hundreds of times as our parents, as our relatives, as our teachers, and so forth. And if we really accept past and future lives, we need to recognize that it's a matter of not recalling their kindness, not that they haven't shown us that kindness. And so with this lack of recognition, with not remembering the kind of kindness that they have shown us, then by thinking about that, by recalling that kindness and feeling a sort of closeness to them, then we can remember that we shouldn't think of someone as being our enemy or someone as being our friend, but recognize that they have actually acted in that way of benefiting and helping us countless times in the past. So therefore, since there is no ground for being attached to some and hating others, I shall develop a mind of equanimity toward all sentient beings. And so then we'll get into the kind of beginning the meditation on equanimity by thinking of a neutral person and so forth. So again, this is the way in which we need to train our mind, think about this, and recognize that because all sentient beings have acted as our friends, as our kind loved ones, we actually should view them with this attitude of love and compassion without any kind of partiality.
Oh yeah. Tangan jo kombe rimba de shek do, tangnyum komgorwa. Anam jinga jo sentient tamje nyeri cha dan ni dan che tangnyum la ne ba guru chi sigora. Tangan jo chitna de samlutam ma do. Ti samlutam gi omara shi tende mare so da re ne samlutam gore so gora. Kombe rimba se tangnyum kombe rimba shegora. Ti kan de sana. Tambu nga jo Jawa Menge, Yagada, Duga Kaya, Tradani, Kaya Mainge, Chitang meet as will pass him Yam Kurese. Telia Kashele, Chagba, Kawacha, the Kashele, Kondusagwe, Yomara, Randan Jawake, Yomarno. O T in the Tazulia, Sem Yam Kures, still a lie or the Sem Yambacho, the Yagada College, South Jam Sangma, the Vandula Tungam and Dubare, Ranguna, Kondusangbalia. Chawache gore chamba kom gore samsa tendeche mesere samtan nyom gore chera ti chedan de nyam sem nyamete lela gro ta ti chela suyo no o tene yela cha kabale so la nyam tada yela cha parmecho ne chamde se da parma se ra tada ni kaya mayenge paru semje yor no me yor no rande do me go konzol ba sem nyam chukure sa o sem nyam chukure te nyame de lela gro ran yaga cheba da do je ke she me tu za ko nyirin che ko yo mara o ta chamde se parmecho ne chamde se zashi na tene so sun zashi sangmalya so sun na mi ta ni do na chi ni de da to zo yo ro to zo le sem nyam gore chera ngaran zo chi na kai na 파마이나 부글이야 니 타이레 용구도 하시 tunde 제게 엄마르서 참말 식반이 싫다고 그래 송거도 가셔를 또 스카레 전에니 지부대야 선반미게 tunde 제게 요르도 바 자실은 섬냠 그래서 라게 자시 바다 마다 니다 니도 부부둘라 속바다 티줄에 파 섬냠 그러와 Etina shi talkboard singara nyenti che sosu namjune dondi chenge ge mingwa shimbata teyo tezul sem nyam go yara tambu ngelia zashi danse tezu ganga nyam sone ne tra sosu namju tra che de mega si che sa che no chado che sa yunenda kondu che sa yunenda napsin che sa yunenda sem mega che sa che ora o tezul sem nyam go re sigora ta tezu sosu parme sem jenda nye nidu da chikbari che ta thukda tawara semnyam siduza parme semje da nga sosu nyeri pama nyendele soba da chikbari che pine tama dilya tawa dilya semnyam e tabshi chagudo tawa tuzu sosu nyendele da chikbatu semnyam ne tangi namju samlu tende tangi yoren riyo mare tamirunga re sa nyendu me gyuba yo mare tanda nga zu tari zindenge tozo ya Kyawangama namso ranga nye nidu che ne tsendi pamale lhaba mambu che yorno take tengi yo marwa dewa te ngazu chi dona lyongu towa kiran kashel kaa je kashel du ngali shibu sosu nyendi chodali shibu kaa che dele tendeke yo ma tezo nyema kiran se bata trache ne tugu tanga kache tranga yo ma re che ra ene pajo de toze tante dimendi shoni maga che kare yor sara Kyawanga de soso tidul sigura sendi tidul nyanja mara kyawanga ngama namsu chunga tidul da mahamba yongju kanga tidul chi soso nyanja sigura o chezan ko kyawanga ma namsu tanda soso kawanye se cheso trache ne soso seba da tende traga ke yo mare ane sendi banda trare singa de kyawanga ma soso nyenyi du kande chayo che tanda tengi yo mardo chezan trare son nyengi mare Tale sem nyambur titos kale khagredo tatunda watozu re sosu meki karne sosu namji maga suyene tele mine komgu yordo atange kol trashe zintere tanzania kare sa kora kyanga manenge pada madanye nidu sendi tezule lagwa che giresa tatande toze dimande sendi tandara toze dimande chile tende samlana maru re samche semnyome tawshi chawra o tijire hindi meta semnyam banye tunet ne semjen tamjelo te sombude trada nye da parma sombude le soso tonte daga de nyam sona rewa tene jona de ta soso namje ngwashimba sokba de ne ye tongba da tinde komsi ngudwa tongba de semnyam ju tije ne paru jele semje tamje sede ta kanga chiba resha samsa semnyam bate kom tup ku yordo o tene semje tamjelo sem nyambanye du tumne tumne sesem yabo nyam sone ta chamba kome go chambure tawada chena sambe chamba kome tawada trebar juji sam sesem manyam na trado zole tawada chena nyam sambe ketu ma do tubuji chona sambe nyaga yordo o deji jona ya
So here then we get into the kind of stages of developing equanimity, of meditating on equanimity. And this begins then with this idea of begin the meditation on equanimity by thinking of a neutral person, and then consider people who are friends and foes. So here, when we say are doing the four immeasurables and we recite like, may all sentient beings abide in the state of equanimity, free from attachment to some and hatred for others, and so forth. That's a more kind of general aspirational sort of wish. But here, when one is meditating on equanimity, we're actually doing so in a way where we really begin it with a kind of personal observing an individual. And here we start with someone that is neutral to us, someone that we don't really have a particular kind of attachment for or aversion for, but rather someone that is neutral. And so it's easier to begin by meditating in this sort of neutral person and then expanding out toward those that are our friends and relatives, and then finally to those that are we perceive as being enemies. And so here, when we are beginning this kind of meditation, again, we are starting with a specific individual, but it should be someone that we really have a kind of neutral feeling toward. And then we can begin to add in those that we see as being like our friends and our relatives. And then we expand out to those that we maybe dislike, that we see as being like enemies, and those that we sort of have an aversion toward, and try to have a similar, get to the point where we have a similar feeling toward all of these beings, thinking that they are all exactly equal in not wanting to suffer and wishing to have happiness. And then this is again something where we're going to need to make an effort while we are in this meditation to try to get rid of this feeling of holding some as being our enemies and holding some as being our friends. Because again, we are really in a state of just not recognizing it, being so focused on the affairs of this life, we can't recognize the way in which those that we designate as enemies have potentially helped us greatly in previous lives, maybe in just our past life. So there's no real certainty about who's an enemy and who's a friend. And so we can't just limit our understanding to the kind of happiness and suffering of this life. But thinking to many previous lives, we can see that really we can't hold someone as being, oh, this is my enemy, and this is my friend. Those things are not really certain. And so in this way, we can expand out from thinking about a neutral person and then thinking about those that we think of as our friends and relatives, and finally to those that we normally hold as being people we don't like or we feel aversion toward. And we are able to expand in this way to have the kind of equanimity toward all. We should develop this such that when we're engaged in the meditation, we begin with a sort of neutral person, expand out to those that we consider to be friends, those that we further expand to those we consider to be enemies, and then try to like expand through our area and so forth, all the way to all sentient beings, and recognizing that they're all the same in wanting to have happiness and not wanting to suffer. And once one has developed this kind of equanimity toward all sentient beings, then one engages in this meditation on loving kindness, which is developing the sincere wish for all of these beings equally to have happiness.
Oh yeah, that in the Tanyum de Disarwa, Sashi Yamba, Chipa to Sem Yamba, nearing Sem Yamba. That is Never Delia, Chambe Sem Yamba Sudwa, Ninji Kumjul Masha on the sign. Chambe Sem Lembas, Simje Tamjelia, the other 10 digit Chambe, and Lembas, the Sashi de Kunyam Sasun, Telechutan, Lembasaja, Tondo Kero, Sokuyorno. No, Tinashi, Niba Chambe Semgi, Rang Simgu de Lembersa, or Simgu Gambo Tabu Mavzepa, Jambo Sokure, Songorno. Oh, Chambe Semgi Kulende. Seriebe Sashi Shindo, Shelas, Ninji Sabin Tamnas, Serieba said the Shajan Yubatil Sura, the Lambrin Tina de Yumbu Tanin and the Chen Cadio Maris, Santa Musera, Serieba said, Lambadil Segore, certain mu said the Sego Mare. Another Tronsepolia, Shingang of the Nima. Jama jab singa ngo to the milang one drone lab seria wundo ga sigre tonse bala seria wundo na se tonse je oh seria wundo ga sigre shajan ya wundo ga tondo je sa kambuchan ma de ra tele ser sigara seria be sa shin do chala se chutan sigara seria be sa shin do chala ningji sabi tamna se ta tele Sashi Kunyam Sashi Lumba Yuba Shanata, Ninja Sabin de Matamne, Chanju Sembi Nuyaki, and the Ninja Sabin de Mata Bures and Gordo. Oh, Ninja Sabin Tamna Talato, Shindu Yons, Cabin Jurose, any chance in getting you good action to Cabin Jures, Gordo, Yajan Jures, Yachurchin, Cabin Jurose. Tene Sembi Chambe Kune. Niji Combarchaus, some get you the Chambesum de Yabosi Rang, control Yambaji Lepsona, any Niji Comgores on Gorno. No, Tichikunaya. No.
So here, then we begin with this development of equanimity, which is like leveling the field. When one wants to gain a good harvest, one needs to begin by leveling the field. And then once one has developed that kind of equanimity toward all sentient beings, one should meditate on loving kindness. And it says here, moisten the mental continuum with the water of loving kindness and prepare it as you would a piece of fertile ground. So once you've leveled out this field, you then kind of moisten your ground with this attitude of loving kindness. So here in the Tibetan text, and I believe this is in all, there's a typo that makes it look like ser, like a gold, but really here what it's talking about is like good fertile ground, like when you're sort of digging things up and you get these good chunks of dirt, like in the towns they would say like, does your field have a lot of good ser? So it's like a kind of fertility to it that comes from having watered that field. And then once one has thoroughly watered the field and prepared it in that way, you plant this seed of compassion. And so when the seed of compassion is planted in such a mind, germination will be swift, proper, and complete. So once you have irrigated the mind stream with loving kindness, meditate on compassion. And this is the kind of, these are the stages in which one goes in order to give rise to this sprout of bodhicitta. It is by first developing this kind of equanimity and then loving kindness, followed by the seed of compassion that will help us give rise to this attitude of bodhicitta.
Boya, oh, the college. Oh, the Tatanema, Tatanda de Niji Kumjuchita, Chambers Bilan, Niji Kombacha, Sonra, Niji Kumju Shegara, Niji Kumjuchita, Niji Kumju Shegara, Chita, Niji Kumju Shegara. Niji Tene, Semje, Tunge, Tungawa, Tamje, Teta, Javara, Debe number, Niji said the Karu Suration, Semje, Tunge, and Tuzulia. Tunge da Trevor de Betsawa Secretary, Niji Moti Songora. Niji Tene Semje Tungawas, Tungawas the Tungan Yonga de Sura, Tungawa Tamje, Semje Tam Tungawa, Semje Tamje, Tunge Teta Trevor de Be, and then number chain Gisimju Secretary. Oh, order the Secretary. China Niji comes to that, and it comes from Semje Tamjane, Tunge number some comes from Gisimje Tamje. Tunge condition argue, Tunge sum dinarki or a sort comes from Senan Dungam, Sungam, Sumi comes a Dungam Sudu Yawa Yeda, Tundra, Mit, Dan Dollar, Rutusan, Dungam Sigdua. Sungam Sudu someday, Tambo, Niba, Sumba, Shiba, things you come there, higher than Netozuliani, Sungam Sigora, Sushindu, Yabu gave to Zul Sigorno. The way comes to Dungam Tozulia. Doing the Sebala Sogwada, Chakban de Sala Sogwata, and the Seba Shambuza, Dungam Sigisarno. Nisungam Sushin to Zebat, and then you more about to the Mabasonza, Sungam, some day she. Sumi comes to the house of woman gang, things the Janjan gang, high rigged in the Yorno. Nambataya, Namshetaya, Message Sarah, Com Jamani, things the Janjan net, so woman getting the high net in the Yorno. Things the temperature, what is it? Sumi comes with us, so may come. Comes from the Semjan Tamja Nese, Tungan number some Chirik, but Shindu, Tunga time comes from the Semja Tamja Tunge, Tungan number some Jane Chirik, but Nargi or Esa. Kashe Tungi Nargi or Kashe Jure Tungi Nargi or Kashe Kaban Doji Tungi Nargi or Tunga Sum Shek, Tungi Tungese. Tungi Tungesu Namju Hakoya. Tendru Yaje, Gonaya, Kangbanaya, Chichi, Nasa Yorno, Tendru Kange Hakongede. Otele Tungi Tungesu, Kaje Dena, Tungi Tungitambu, Tungeri Kaje, Nana Gores, Nana Gonaya, the Dede, but Tungena Yan de Jurno, Tungi Tungesure. Jure Tunges, Soa Devato Silva, Soa Devato Solia, Tene Penachasona. Tane, any Yamatromburajil patch, Sawi Chesajil lives on, and they have Trombus at the one younger. Yanko de Kajin says on Anguna Chis, and you do Maratungo Jundura, or to it on the land Jure Dungas, standard the was on the Soy or another. kowe dewa tsangma tagare don kange raga chik paa se suna ta yaba chungsu sam susu dewa lomba yin sigi wara ngone chane dewa yin ko tempo che dea ko re de gyudan kende yuwa daga dea ur de degi maare dewe gyugin de yuwa na ya dewa dea tugu maare paru jen gyur je dunga jen dugu wara chetan gyurwe dunga se tanda dewe sun re chorgi wara dade yin ringzi dea da ane ko ya dunga ngo gyur dugu wara chetan gyurwe dunga sigi wara chowa sakche ki chowa dewa dugu sigi wara nyamo wangi chume chowa dewa dinde wara oto zulya keban duji ki dunga se de kam sumgali kebe chane keba sigi wara duji ki dunga se de za sakche ki le da ane nyamo wangi chume pungbu to zula duji ki dunga se wara nyamo da sakche ki le da nyamo be duji heba de tingi ki wangi chume pungbu yina keban duji dunga se kam sumgali kebge wara de le da nyamo be shangwa chane chume pungbu chi wara lu ke yangu mara suji number shebe phumbula soba kewala soba otuli sigora o de kam sumgal khap gren duji tonge de dengam le duji tonge yore songam le yore songmi kham le yore do tonge ji tonge de dengam da doba she she ma do songam de julia jure tonge da teni ka sore kaban duji tonge da tejo yore ma do tonge shenda kanga yo ma do oh, di tungi sumcha de sigora. Diso. No, shindu tungi wa yimbe ti siru kwaleso. Kamsumbe samje tamje ne tungi ni namba sumje chirik bar. Shindu tungi kashe tungi sumga na gore kashe chik na gore odunde chirik bar. Shindu tungi wa ta yimbe ti siru. Samje tamje la te kombar chawa te tan trena sam komguresti. Chita kamsumje samje tamje 심지어 컨디션에 동행이 나와 교회 동행이 나와 개반도지 동행이 나와 대수 상만탐제 동행되다 되나냐도 저를 교제냐 뭐 어쩌와 들려야 지단이 지금주래 했어라 단지네 마 너를 알릴 때시 좋나
So here, then we turn to the meditation on compassion, how to go about meditating on compassion. What is this attitude? So it says here under the heading of identifying the nature of suffering, that the compassionate mind has the nature of wishing all sentient beings to be free from suffering. So in general, this is what we are talking about when we say compassion, is that kind of attitude, that kind of wish. That is the essence of compassion. And we should meditate on this kind of compassion for all sentient beings, because all the beings in the three realms of existence are intensely tortured by the three types of sufferings in various forms. So within the cyclic existence, we have the desire realm, the form, and the formless realm. In the desire realm, so-called because we have a great deal of desire for the objects of our senses, in particular those kinds of physical desires, we have the 5 or 6 types of being, the hell beings and hungry ghosts and animals and humans. And then there is the form realm, wherein one is born as sort of a celestial being, a godlike being, by having attained these meditative concentrations, the first, second, third, or fourth meditative concentration. And one could also be born in the formless realm, wherein there is no kind of physical form, but one has attained these deep states of meditative stabilization, like that of limitless space, limitless mind, nothingness, and the peak of samsara. There are these various stages of meditative stabilization that one can have attained. But these three realms are all pervaded by suffering, are all in the nature of suffering, because the 3 types of suffering pervade these. There are the 3 types of sufferings that are not all applicable to all of those realms. But we have first the type of suffering that we recognize as being suffering, the kind of suffering of suffering, it's sometimes called. And this is those types of suffering that, so long as it is around, we identify it as suffering. So whether it's like our head hurts or our foot hurts or we have some sort of sickness, so long as that lasts, we recognize and identify that as suffering. And this is something that the beings in the desire realm are subject to. Then there is the suffering of change. And this is really referring to all feelings of happiness, contaminated feelings of happiness within cyclic existence. So, for example, when we are, say, afflicted by cold and we move into some nice sunlight, well, before we know it, we're sweating due to the heat of that sunlight and we have to change again. So all of the kind of feelings that we experience, these contaminated feelings within samsara, are not stable. It's not as though we can count on anything. They're always going to change into something else. And this becomes in the nature of suffering. So this is the second type of suffering that beings are afflicted by. And then there is the suffering that pervades to all levels of existence, whether it is the desire form or formless realm. All levels of cyclic existence are pervaded by what we call this pervasive suffering of conditioned existence, the state of having taken up these contaminated aggregates due to the force of karma and afflictions. So whether that is a physical form like we have in the desire realm or the form realm, or something that's just of a mental nature like in the formless realm, this is all subject to being under the power of karma and the afflictions, and thereby is suffering. So here, these three types of suffering, that kind of abject suffering, the suffering of change, that's really our contaminated feelings of happiness within cyclic existence, as well as this pervasive kind of suffering of conditioned existence. These are the kinds of ways that sentient beings are tortured, as it says. So meditating in this way on compassion for all sentient beings, because of the fact that the beings in the three realms of existence are intensely tortured by these three types of suffering. So this is the kind of contemplation in which one engages.
Oh yeah. Tadi ne ma karshek dosana. De nyingji kumju de doa rido soso cheja nyingji kumju kebar shek doa. Tina ne tambu ngesong ki tanda tama de shede. Tunge sum gichi rikbe sum jenam tunge te da trena shimaru chawar juji chawar chawar shay tinde shen chidan nyingji kumju she songa. Tadi ne ma sum jen doa re ru soso tunge samje nyingji kumju kebar shek doa. Didare rishi samje nyewe samje kanda yinba teda ta tambu nyewe tunge samde nyewa li nyingji kumju yordo. Teda rishi samje nyewe tunge nyewe samje kanda yinba teda ne kyun me che yun rinwa cawa la sokbe tunge nazo ji chur chingba kona yin no se o cawe chanye yinan cawe tunge me sekbe tunge nyongyo yordo chanye yinan sokbo chakba ngo june ne tunge nyongyo yordo o dina shi tunge mambu nyewe tunge mambu yore cawa sera rapsa ser tati shetan gondore cawa sera ro chagi kangba memba andaba tinde na leptebe sigora cawa rapsa se tinde ni sumya tudebe tinde sigora cawa rapsa se eno narme se lu korante me memba arche me ngo yudungero tudu sigda narme se cawa rapsa name tingjum se ya simje mambo su ruru suni di ne ri sundwa ya shebar ne ta ralu senge de de ne te te namba chengi pa namba rab tinde ta mambu shedo ta she moja nyawa ta sanye tongye che changye do changmo chakba ge temne sobo chakba dang o chi pa che ken do me do ne shi pa ken do tinde mambu sora ta to ma shen de ke do o ti che ta de zo me ba ke mar to nga zo pe jana sung do nyewe tunge che te ba de mela yose mela longba me ba ne pe me dra ta ne sho mambu yung do me dra jam ne se ba yung go do ka ne chak ba jam ne che shi te ba ka ri rab de ru du sa mi ka ga ka ne ti chi do ka sa so bo chak ba jam ne shi do ra a pe de se yo de ka le an du sa ne me ka shen ro ma do kan ti chi de ne nye da dang gu se do tung gu se do 동네는 그 컨트롤 있는 돈 그게 좀 차차버리시고 그도 되네 차바게 서고 차바게 시도도 어디나 신고 동네 밀어야 내가 동네 산도 밀어요 지금 가지고 좀 통도 선제 세그리 깨tom네 세그리 방시 땅그리 전에 가지고 밀어요라 뒤여서 그 이 마셔케면도 가지고 좀 통되고도 뒤나 신그 심지어 망부 차외 동에 망부녀 된게 장외 동에 망부녀 된게 요도 내가 산에 장에서 제조 가르소래 신나고에 된다 장자 말도 근데 저 도산 누가 생각지 밀래 요도 이단 잡으시는 그 사회에 통해에 민무기 망부시기도 근데시 이다도 돌려고 사회에 소부 감도 근데 동에 양기 요도 근데 동에 시신분 용게 제주를 냐와시 이다시 용거도 제주 동에 소소시기도 다 제주야 요래다세 제주 계지기 군대 가고 그래서 소소락바 여be 시기도 매워질 요서 정당기 요 말아 근데 동에 냐 요다 동에 군대다시 파가고 그러마도 틀레게 냥가 요다 틀레메게 버켜나 쇼고다시 소소랑 요다시 소소락바 요다시 요도 ninji sembo de soso lagba yene kanga chone singazu kaban roma de soso lagba yebare chedra dadi mambusheta ndire dadi maindanga do deda rishi semje nyewe semje kanda yemba deda ne gyun mecheje gyun ringbu de angara zo mi chedan dingmara nyewe cheje do shedu yun ringbu shibshe yordo ta yun ringbu degu sardo tibot sabchen bu saben debulia 규미체제 유행이라 사와라 속에 사와다 착발라 속에 동에 나저지 추를 칭바세 코나 인노세 동에 예추 자침부들이야 되니 semjama 칭바나시 동에 자준을 맞추더니 요즘 봐도 동에 냠대 구레서 거라 시점된데 같이도 세트서 강가 산제 되는 송샤스 예니 송게 얼마도 매니 송게 된다 요 말도 대신도 이다 남라 아니 이다 동에 삼고다 녀외 동에도 삼 텐데텐데 요래 삼 심제 현달에 닝치 콤네 라야 텐데게 뜨버디 사나 텔리키그레 삼 나텔레 메제바 세고 삼사 니가 냠도 삼을 당거도 신다 때문 당게 소리지 녀와도 텐데 냥데게 요래 칸다 삼사 랭에 버사네 삼사 티에 삼고레 소소야 델이야 랭에 버사네 틴 토만 메만에 거제게 시 다데 마음바나 겨와 천딜레 텐데 데버심 부스타미네 겨와가마 칸데 사이시 삼 텐데리 케시그레 삼 나텐딜 케능에 텐데 동에 용고레 메게와 세고 삼 나르삭베 랭에 버토줄레 샥바체 천딜레 테니 미게벨레 마사바체 겨와 통만 메만에 사시 마부요레 테줄린 겨바체 샥범체 텐데 세고요도 대신도 이다 남자 배절 신도 미세베 때봐서 사회에 통해에 네 똑베 동에 예시도 쓰고도 제바다 꼼바 이 추통에다 되면은 동에 향기거든 꼼베 동에게 셈제 꼼베 동에라서 텐데 셈게는 마부 연구래서 아니 류깜바 류신도 동에 와서 류베 신감부차나 신제제 사회 통에 맨 발류 감도 어디서도 깜베 류신도 동에 망보 냥오 셰카체도 다나시 던도 남라야 찍래 찍사와 다들 아주 던도도 동대도 티비다 도즈나 땡기도 찍지 세네 다칼레도 아테 나마 다칸 카마 사고로 치 사야세 띵냥가래도 사야 던도를 시켜내고 샤다다 라다 텐데 깨네 아부데 삼고도 코코 사이즈 사나 삼모도 파사니 티고 전부 사야게 메도와 다 현다도 파사야 거라 그 마산에 짜네 사고도 현다 사고도 이 사야지도 사야지 마도 가도이나 그때 삼다데고도 뒤인데 또 찍래 찍 사회 동에 텐데 요래서 티셔도 가래서 던도 남자 찍래 찍 사와다 남중간 주세 시그라 찍래 찍 사회 동에서 아니 그가서 내시 때문에 동에서 봐 아니 현재 밀라 속에 현다야 세그라 ngal pakba de koyo sere ngal ya chwa de koyo se ngal kera riba de koyo sere cheje seyora ezan ko bien site mo be tonge se chigle chi sawe tonge shenge koyo che gi tonge peje cheje ke ne ta ande ne je se to je tende seyora tendo namja chigle chi sawa da thowa da seba da number sewa la so be tonge number mangbo nyowa khonar na ngo se 어디봐도 찔람나 가마다 정도마다 Ta dezo wa nyawa yida tendo dezo tonge samde tezo le nyingji komya ne raya de lenge basa ba tezo le kena tene tonge mambo nyongu do sam tezo le meje chego sam sa sam lo koko yora oya te shi do.
So here then we get to this meditation on compassion and recognizing here. We can, it goes into a kind of extended meditation on compassion by thinking about the various types of sufferings of these individual types of beings. So in general, having this thought of wishing for others to be freed from their suffering, whatever sort of being in these three realms, whatever kind of suffering they're experiencing, may they be freed. That is a kind of general thought. And then we go into the individual sort of meditations on the sufferings of various realms. So the Buddha has said that heat and other types of pain constantly torture beings in the hells for a very long time. So thinking about like the hell realms, we have these various realms that are described in other texts, like hot and extremely hot, and we're talking about there being burning houses of fire and so forth, and this kind of unrelenting torture of suffering. And so this is the kind of contemplation that we should engage in, thinking about the various types of hells. And this is something where we can think about them as being hell beings. Like there are hell beings that will be born in such hells and have extremely long lives and so forth, both the sort of hot hells and the cold hells. But we can also extrapolate and think about the kind of sufferings of hot and cold that humans experience. We don't need to be able to directly see the hell realms to know the kind of suffering that the hell realm could cause. We can look around the world and see that there are those who die by fire, say, those that die of cold. Like there are some Tibetans who, trying to cross the mountains, were unable to survive. They died of hypothermia in those mountains. And we can see that many types of beings experience these sufferings of hot and cold. And so too, when it comes to the kind of sufferings of hungry ghosts and so forth, we can see that those sufferings of hunger and thirst are also sufferings that we as humans experience. There are many who die of famine and die from hunger, and we can look and see those kinds of sufferings within humans as well. And this is not something that is described in order just to scare us, but it's really for a purpose, for generating compassion toward those beings who are afflicted by those types of suffering, who are tormented by those, and also to recognize that we don't want to be born there, that we want to eliminate the kind of causes that would lead us to take such a rebirth in such a suffering realm. So when we talk about these kinds of suffering situations, we can look at the kinds of sufferings on the basis of a human, but when we're talking about the length of life of, say, a being who was born in a hell, it's extremely, it's much, much, much longer than an ordinary human being's kind of life. And here it says in the text, the Buddha has said, so this is something that is taken from the Buddha's teachings. And we need to think about this in terms of not just like we're looking at a movie, like, oh yeah, there's the suffering of the hells over there and the suffering of the hungry ghosts over there. And it's sort of something from which we are disconnected. But we actually need to have a feeling about this, that what would it be like if I were to be born in such a realm, subjected to such sufferings and torment? And we need to actually think about what it is like for those beings in order to generate compassion. In terms of thinking about it for ourselves, it causes us, it incites us to make an effort to not accumulate the causes to be born in a realm like that. And recognizing that we have accumulated since beginningless time all kinds of negativities and non-virtues, we're impelled to engage in a process of confession, of purifying those negativities that we ourselves have accumulated. And then we also are able to, on the basis of this, generate compassion for others. Like looking now at the animal realm, we can also see that He has also said, the Buddha has also said that hungry ghosts are scorched by hunger and thirst and experience immense physical suffering. And again, this is something we can also think about in relation to humans. And we can see the struggles of animals are particularly apparent to us. We can also see animals suffering in many miserable ways. They eat each other, become angry, and are hurt and killed. Now, normally we see the struggles of animals described, we often get this, they eat each other. So if you are born as a predatory kind of an animal, you have no choice but to kill others in order to sustain yourself. That is part of the kind of suffering that you endure as that type of an animal. And we often see that not only do they sort of eat one another, but there's also this level of stupidity, of delusion that comes with being born as an animal. And when one is born as an animal, one is also subject to the kinds of exploitations from humans. Maybe it's not just even for your meat to be able to eat you, but just for your fur or something that we want on your body. Animals are sort of treated as disposable for humans. And so in this way, we should contemplate individually the types of suffering of these various beings in order that we generate compassion for them, but also with that, a kind of desire to not accumulate the causes that would lead us to be born in such a realm ourselves.
Oh yeah, that me to me shake do atanashi. Me nam jon deba yon so deba to that chene many betung en yongi odo. Me nam jon deba yon so pongbe pongne chila chiku da chil kong do sayada. Chil never chair da ro. Mene so togba yido pama nye de kadola sobo tezu da cheve tung yongora. Miduk bada trebas and Mendebe Tala Soba and Chit to the Trebet on Yonguada. Even Le Jurbala Soba, Uat Pongba, to Norjala Meva Sayaton and Meva Sobeton and Yongudua. You are Sobeton and Pato Meba, Noranango said. That me to me and the Kekan Chilla Soba to me or to do some time in Yizikea. Oh, Tindicom, but Kandan de Shala Sobe, Nemombe Kunativa Nazoji. Tachita Mizun de Chala Soba, Rakontung, Aja Chadola Soba Chen, so Tunge Shen Tunge, Mambu Yaki Sigoton, Kandan de Chala Soba, and de Chakontung, Aja Chado Giwangi, and it's so simple Miki Session, Tunge Chet and the Chioda. Kandan de Chala Soba, Yamon Bakune Tiba, Nazoji Sim Tiba Danse. Kanda Tawa Yamba Taya, the Chula Soba Tendation, Tawa Tachi. Najudi Yabu said about Tawa China sim to do it. Jada Yungudo, I think something like Jamang door. Che, so the young Tawa Timani Kanga, Yawamari said to receive door. To the Dandi said, Kanda Tawa Yamba now sober, sing with your sim, sing Jan and Raw. Kura Tamja, Tungaji Q in bear. Tungaji Q in bear. In the Kega, do a Kega, my summer should have been rich pass my sarges at the ten anybody, Sarge to Yungudo, Kega in this. Kanda, Kanda, yeah. Okay, can do wash into Shindu Tunge, Kona, you know, so Tunge Mambunya, or a similar order. The Kega Nachilla Sobe Tunge, the Otinis. Tawa that in the channel part took set to me and do. No, did it. That didn't sit in something more to rapture in it to me till I do. It and Bam resolute you in any summer telling us young when I sing out to Gango Shara. And then so they do a chicken society and that Ganga. Young when I sing Bev so something there to a Tunga and do. Oh, yeah, that will be what Tibet me to it.
And then we turn to the suffering beings that are the suffering that we as human beings experience. So we can see that the human beings too experience various acute kinds of pain. And so we have the kind of separation from those that we love or those things that we want. So here it says, not able to find what they want, they are resentful and harm one another. They suffer the great pain of losing desire desirable things and confronting the undesirable things, as well as the pain of poverty. So we experience this kind of various sufferings of, say, being separated from what we want or those that we love, having to meet with things that we don't want, having to meet with our enemies, having to experience misfortune and loss and so forth. And so they suffer the great pain of losing the desirable things and confronting undesirable things, as well as the pain of poverty. There are those whose minds are bound by various fetters of afflictions like craving. Others are in turmoil with different types of wrong views. And so here, this is, we can see how it is that we are under the control, when under the control of our various afflictions, whether it is desire, attachment, pride, hatred, jealousy, and so forth. We create all kinds of sufferings for ourselves. And on the base of having wrong views, of holding, say, the view that one's own view is superior to others and sort of looking down upon others, we create all kinds of fights between us over what is right and what is wrong and so forth. And so we can see that all these kinds of bad views, in addition, create our kinds of suffering, whether it's thinking that, like, well, my religion is better than your religion, even. Those types of wrong views lead us to further suffering. And these are all causes of dukkha. So these are all, these kinds of things lead us to experience suffering, these wrong views, these misperceptions, having to encounter what we don't want, and not getting what we want, things like birth, aging, sickness, and death. All of these fall into this kind of suffering that humans experience. And so therefore, these are all causes of dukkha or suffering, and therefore they are always in excruciating pain, like being on a precipice. This is sort of the description of our suffering situation as humans.
Oh, yeah, don't you? 동네 다 대바나 집에 라 강다인 반도라리 tutu 강다인 바테다네 따도 치포와다 바탄데 무슨 저번에 요리 동네 요마데 대신도나 아니 겨치마 내송을 소바텐데 동네도 하고도 하고 사도 속에 지 마음바나 가와께 뭐 시간을 저 하고도 저 대단에 따도 치포와다 단대 야보유네 치고그래 삼딜 따도 때 요마르 삼 동해야 요도 치포와다 동아 치망에 송을 동안에 소바 텐데 삼로코네 셴네 동해냐고 요도 동아다 동아라 소바 집에 냥에지 심라 내나 치더데서 텐데 시에다 마음반에 계속 컨택해 삼네 대심데 요레스 동해 요레스 코테와케 마르 타치도 대와케 마레스 내가 메단 텐도다 텐데나 시동에도 요 말이제 부숨서고 요래데 이나고 텔레타도 테 멤버들 치워다 시베치서 가바지 섬께서다 하고니야 동에베 잡고요 버래 살아 치부 동지지 동에서도 치포하다 마음바나 계속 하고 요라 티시도네 토시스케요 말아 테게고 요라 두지지 동에 얘네 레다니모베 생이지 그 현재 왕경원이다. 계절을 란식병 현재 생이데 로 탐절을 켜봐이 넣어서 다 켜반 두지기 동에서거라. 다 대주 송감다. 송미지 감기 하도줄에 두지기 동에지 나로티거라. 현다도 요 말이데. 두지기 동에 얘네 레다 녀몬베 생이기 그 상황에서 레 삭제지 레다 녀몬베 왕기 중에 풍부티 단대지 랑데요데 야부스 랑데요데 테코 케지케지 조네 마도네 양고 니만나 시질레브게로 마도 타바르스테 게요 마도 야냐와 예다 돈르로 소바 가와치르네 텐데케요 마레 오티 인디코 두지기 동에 수다 소미 간살레 소바테제 두지기 동에 요레스 쯤메시네 두지기 동에데 감숨가 심제 탐절이요도 레다 님부베 샤완데 주네 가와가와케 소솔이 키실레라하메 풍분 돌리는 라마메 tidu kari yondo ina rawa meba laki wanga yongu yordo duchi ji dunga yene lada nyomo be chanyi ji gyu shangi wanga ngongi da keji riri lan jikbe ngang jengi chanyi des tanda kiawa sambu chi topde yore te dunga gyu dunga tosu mena ya ko keji riri ne te sendo yora keji riri ne sendo ya ko chini kawa chito tanda ke yo mardo tingi ji nipati zo sasana ko yang do no tarba toba marwa siri ba da tende ge yang ting ji jang komne si ji de ji ke so na tarba in se tende sam ge or de tarba de mar do na ba chena tene yang ya ma ge ne si ji ba do song ne ge tung ya ju si ba do se ra da yang ti tarba ma re se ra ka she ge si ji ke so na ne tarba de se chiru ba de jin ti ro ting ji tempo ji ya ke so ta tarba toba de se ro ina nangba chene ko tarwa mare siji badu sone ki tunge yang ju sibadu sile yin drebu di tso chasuna tini yang kawa chene ke yungura kaya sene da mebe tongba ni to me du zang ko tondo le saya yore ngema sa shebe le ki to nyamu da tuzu nipa tso yo marwa o roa kawa le suda duji ji dunga yene le da nyomo be chenyi ki tu shawa ki ngo ni da keji re lan ji be nga je ji chenyi de ro tamja le chaba yena so chaba duji ji dunga de ro tamja le chaba de gam sung me kam tamja le chaba de dunga dan jo dunga de tamja le chaba me do te ji tu na
So here then the desire realm gods, here turning to the next type of being, says gods suffer the dukkha of change. So here within the desire realm, these kinds of divine beings, these gods, they don't have the kind of abject suffering of suffering, but they have this suffering of change. Although temporarily they might have all kinds of excellent things, when it comes time for them to die, it says here in the text, for example, signs of impending death and their fall to unfortunate states constantly oppress the minds of gods of the desire realm. How can they live in happiness? So there is, although they may have had an extremely sort of pleasant life as a god, when they approach their death, they're losing all of that. And so they have this extreme suffering of change, of not having any kind of certainty where they will take rebirth in the future. They have no power to determine where they are going to be. And most likely they're going to fall into the extreme kind of suffering of the lower realms. And so this, the suffering of gods includes having this kind of suffering at the time of death, of the uncertainty of where they will go. And now, while the forms and formless realms do not have the sort of suffering of suffering and the suffering of change, they are not free from the suffering of pervasive conditioning. And so here, continuing in the text, it reads, pervasive dukkha of conditioning is what arises under the power of causes characterized by actions and afflictions. It has the nature and characteristics of momentary disintegration and pervades all wandering beings. So even those kinds of beings who have attained this really stable state of meditative stabilization and are in the form, or say in the formless realm, have gone all the way up to, say, the peak of samsara, there's no stability or permanence to the sort of state that they have achieved. And they have no autonomy because they are still under the power of the karma and the afflictive emotions. And so when the sort of karma that has led them to take such a rebirth in, say, the formless realm, even the peak of samsara, is exhausted, they're going to have to fall into the lower realms. There are those who, having attained that kind of peak of meditative stabilization, the peak of samsara, think think that they have attained liberation. And then when they fall into the lower realms, they kind of lose faith in the possibility of liberation. And so all of those states, even those that might seem so blissful, sort of like this meditative kind of state wherein there is no suffering of suffering or suffering of change, this is still under control of this pervasive dukkha of conditioning, meaning that one doesn't have any autonomy to be able to decide where one is born, but rather is under the control of karma and the afflictions. And so without the kind of realization of emptiness and selflessness, one will continue to create karma. And thus, even those beings who have a very sort of subtle meditative state in, say, the peak of samsara are still subject to this pervasive dukkha of conditioning. And therefore, we should see that all sentient beings are pervaded by this kind of momentary disintegration and being under the control of our actions and afflictions.
Oh, yeah. Tantine ma de shegdoa. Tante tama de droa so tunge no chu samrutane so le niji kumgyo no. Ta droa tamje le niji kumju de chitan de shegdoa dene. Tewe na se droa tadane tunge ge meche barwe na do shukba in barte la se. Ta droa de da nyem ba wange chi ne chi tun droa de droa se gora. Droa se la nyi de shama chene. Kichi gyuni droa ri tu lo kora chen dronge de droa se gora. Tenen droa tada ne se tunge ge meche rabdon ba na do shukba in barte la se. Tunge ge memba wa che yoba che tena no butu zu pa memba sana lo droa shak do ra me ba droa shak do ko ya buri tungi na kan tena shin je ko tunge nya de ge in ba che te la se gora. Tenen droa tada tunge ge meche barwe na do shukba in barte la se shukba da sungba in barte la tedar tunge mende ba dar tedar da tunge mende ba ta so droa ri tu la ni ko ni tunge mende ba tar roa memba we na do shukba mende ba tar tunge mende ba tar shen tam je te dan rao nyam do sam se semjen shen da ja tunge mende ba jang sungba re nyam do sam se kema ki hu se ta tunge samlu tan de sa semba kyo e ke chere do kema ki hu se kan ra sa tunge gi so chone kema ki ta la dugbe semjen de das so yi do semjen de das ora pama nyen de la so ba te zo tanda zo spata de tunge mebe so ri yo de ke wa thoma me ba ne tunge de jang nyo tanda ko ma ba na ya tha me ba nya he re de yo no sabso de che ko tunge che thashi ma che ne ko ke wa thoma me ba ne te ba ne tanda nya che te ju re de yo ra ke ma ki ta la dugbe semjen de da tunge na sa tanda zo ne tunge thoma me ba ne tanda nya na ma ba tu nya te ya de sam ta zo kanga semjen de che la pangbe namba je de ta le so na shi chambe sem da te zo de yo ko re to te ne sam le de kor gi or do ko tu gro ke ma ke ta la ye to we semje pamala so we semje de da tunge na se te tunge nya ko ya ti yin na se ne tunge de le chi da tarwa cha she tani se ta tunge de le ka de je tarwa che ko na se tani tunge wa se ra tunge ge na do chi ba shin do 심지어 생야 때다 저 때야 동에도 타로 돼 버려서 동에와 신도 제제 소소 냥게 바나 신게 소화기에 쓰고라 신 동에냐 돌아 아치다 타바자시 단이 동에와 신도 제제세 대다 자와른데 베나베 닝지 테 땡인제란 도갸로서 어떻게 나도 닝지 콤도자 담보 삼로 땅제 소소제 부삼로 땅 되요라 지도 땡긴진다지 샤니 닝지 공부요도 단 로다 대바다 사와다 파츠 밀치소나 로데드선 어디 닝지 들레버 체고레서요도 안전은 덤버라진 더 삼로 땅지 대네 로선은 제단 미네시타그마도 참바다 닝지 땅님치다 매차사라 텐데 매베체 그게 루두사 치소나 루두레버 체고레서요라 텐데 저런데 남베 닝지테 띵인진라 도갸롱세 닝지 꼼제 삼르당게 베카비나다 테니 칠로바 체네 레가체네 로 미치존나 로라 저람 탐제돈 로아다 데바나 치카디나 통데리송 탐제간 레베체고요라고네잖아 sentient tongue resident tongue the Tana, Chena, some Tawandona, or Chesu, Kawakum, Ra, sentient Nirin, Dona, Tanium Shana, Samsa, Nadunaske, Omara, Tendu Regitona, Tendus Hachemado, I ninja some to do tango yordo. Lenshitemu Betonga or Tandu Tender or some Sakuni to do tango yorda. I'm going to tell you what to do, Lebcha Gora. Ninja thing is in La Duja, Roncholam Tamjet on Rondi, two Tamjet or Simja Tamjela Combarchades, Katuina, no change to Yongudua, Dona Dana, Kaduina, make a Simjet on a transit chamber, Daniela Tenet, Sanjay, and Judicesera, and the Zukanga Sanjay, Kutobe, some. Thomas when the Tingy Jamba in the Samba Ninja Comna, Sanjay, the Zuka, some Nyamdo, Chanju, Sam Danij, the Kanga to do level, shall we say no? 2 times to Samja Tamjala combat shades. Oh, Tiba to see, Jana. This what we shall do. Combat shades, Tibado, yeah. Oh, this is
So here, as we do this meditation on compassion, one can go through the kind of individual types of beings, go through each individual type of suffering. And here, then it goes to kind of a more general thought of the sufferings of beings, where it says, therefore, see all wandering beings as immersed in a great fire of dukkha, and think that they are all like you in not desiring suffering at all. And so all of those beings that are cycling within samsara, that are propelled by their karma and afflictions, are as if they are in this like burning, a great fire of suffering, subject to all kinds of sufferings without sort of respite from that. And all of these types of beings, all of the 6 types of beings, are all the same as me, in not wanting to suffer at all and wanting to have happiness. So to think that they are all like you in not desiring suffering at all. Alas, all my beloved sentient beings are in such pain. What can I do to set them free and make their sufferings your own? So in this way, we should contemplate, think about the sufferings of sentient beings and really try to take them on ourselves. And this is based upon seeing sentient beings as sort of desirable, as something that we feel a kind of kinship to. So where it says here, all my beloved sentient beings are in such pain, we need to, again, have developed this kind of feeling of closeness, of tenderness toward all sentient beings in order to have this kind of thought of compassion arise. And so all the way up until this moment, they have been, all of these sentient beings, ourselves included, subject to these various kinds of suffering and are creating the causes of their future suffering. And so just like me, who doesn't want to suffer and wants to have happiness, we want to then have this strong wish to free other sentient beings from their sufferings, just in the way that we want to be free from our own. And so whether we do this by when we are on the cushion engaged in a kind of single pointed focus, wherein we are thinking about compassion and deliberately trying to generate that kind of compassion in a single pointed way, or whether we are pursuing our ordinary activities, we should meditate on compassion at all times, focusing on all sentient beings and wishing that they all be free from suffering. So here, we shouldn't just sort of like meditate on compassion while we're on the cushion and then forget it all when we get up and are going throughout our daily life, but rather we should have this recognition of the suffering nature of other sentient beings and a desire to free them from their suffering and a desire for them to have happiness throughout our daily activities. So really all 4 of the 4 immeasurables we should try to cultivate in our daily life, of wanting others to have happiness and be free from their sufferings and abide in a state of equanimity and have this real true joy. And so really it's a matter of like recalling the kind of situation that sentient beings are in. I mean, normally we're sort of numb to this, but we need to have compassion in a way that pervades our ordinary everyday activities, whatever it is that we may be doing. So we need to really keep a recollection of the suffering nature, as well as this desire to free sentient beings from their suffering. And at the same time, recognize that that compassion, that attitude of compassion for other sentient beings is really the cause of our own future Buddhahood. And so hold that as something that is extremely precious and try to cultivate it in all times and situations.
Oh yeah, thank you. So
the time is up for today, so that will end our teaching for today.
Thank you so much, Geshe Thabkhe, and thank you, Katrina, and thank you also for Tripon Losang Ling Monastery, who was taking such good care of Geshe Yeshe Thabkhe and also making it possible that the streaming can happen here. So we will do a dedication.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path and all spiritual friends who practice it have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Losang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kandir Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. In the snowy mountain pure land, you're the source of good and happiness. Powerful Tenzin Gyatso Chenrezi, may you stay until samsara ends.
Thank you, everybody, and we will see each other next Saturday at 8:30 Pacific time.
Oh yeah,